Coming up in our next installment of America's Hope, they risk it all in order to protect our freedom. The men and women of the United States military. They're the focus of our next America's Hope. Good evening and welcome to America's Hope. I'm Kelly Wright, and wherever you are, as I've always said, we hope that you're well, taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. And you know, you matter so much that many people will sign up, they'll raise their right hand to voluntarily serve in the United States military, whether it's the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Coast Guard. They are signing up to serve you. You, my fellow American. Why? Because they believe in this country. And they believe that by raising their right hand to serve, to protect and defend the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic, and to uphold the U.S. Constitution, that means they are willing to put it all on the line, to even go so far as to be engaged in warfare to protect our freedom. You know the saying, freedom ain't free. So tonight, rather than just waiting on Veterans Day or Memorial Day, let's honor our men and women who serve in the United States military. In fact, those who are serving in harm's way on covert missions, and those who are just here taking care of the homeland. Wherever they go, when they put on that uniform, show them the honor and the respect and the gratitude that they deserve for raising their right hand to serve you. It shows a very unselfish desire for them to put country ahead of self and then to go on to serve admirably and honorably God and country. And that's our focus tonight. Let's get started. And I'm joined now by a very good guest, and I'm just so honored to have on. His name is Jim Roberts, and in 1985, this is something you need to know about Jim. He founded Radio America, a news talk network that has now grown to more than 700 affiliates nationwide and boasts more than 7 million listeners. That's quite an accomplishment. And in 1995, Roberts founded the American Veterans Center, an organization honoring the sacrifice and guarding the legacy of America's veterans. And the AVC supports a wide range of programs, including organizing the National Memorial Day Parade in Washington, D.C., a national conference, several educational efforts, and an oral history program, and a quarterly publication, American Valor Quarterly. There's so many things we can talk about, so let's just go ahead and get to it. Jim, good of you to join us. It's an honor to have you on, and thank you for what you're doing for the veterans of the United States military. And in fact, let's start there. Why did you start that program?
Kelly, it's good to be with you. You mentioned that I started the radio network in 1985, Radio America, and for the first several years, we recorded weekly cassettes with short programs of about 2 or 3 minutes each, and we sent them in the mail to radio stations around the country. That was our network back then. Then we got into longer form programming, and in 1991, the National Archives announced that they were entertaining bids to do a program for the 50th anniversary of World War II. And they had the CBS radio collection from the war in the archives, and they wanted to use them in some sort of radio format. So we bid on the program and on the project, and we won. And so we got the opportunity to produce something that ended up being called World War II Chronicles. And we brought out of retirement a fellow by the name of Ed Hurley. He was known as the voice of World War II. He narrated the universal newsreels that were shown in the movie houses during the war. And Ed was at that time probably 80, and he came out of retirement and voiced these World War II chronicles, which were about 5-minute programs, weekly, looking back 50 years ago, every week in World War II.
Welcome to World War II Chronicles, a weekly tribute to America's fighting men and women in commemoration of the Second World War.
And so we produced these, we sent them again in the mail, and we had a tremendous success with them. We had over 500 stations that ran these programs weekly for 4 years. And so in 1995, when the World War II 50th anniversary period ended, we had a tremendous amount of support going. We had a direct mail program that was going very strong. World War II interest was growing. Things like Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan and so forth. And then in 2004, the World War II memorial was dedicated. And we scheduled our conference for May of that year instead of the fall to coincide with the dedication of the memorial. And we got involved in holding a parade, which was called a Parade Salute to World War II Veterans. And we managed somehow to pull that off. And the mayor of Washington, D.C. at that time, Anthony Williams, said, the parade was on Memorial Day. He says, well, why does Washington, D.C. have a Memorial Day parade every year? Well, I had no idea. Nobody had any idea. And so he said, why don't you look into that? So we looked into it and found that there had been an annual parade in Washington, D.C. between World War I and in 1942. And after that, it had been discontinued. Nobody knew why. He said, why don't you start it up again? So being foolish, I guess, or reckless or whatever, naive, we did start it up, and it was quite a struggle for the first many years. I should note at that point that we changed the name from World War II Veterans Committee to the American Veterans Center, so we could honor all veterans. By that time, the United States was involved in 2 wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, and we wanted to be able to honor also Vietnam veterans and Korean War veterans, and now we're getting new veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. So the AVC, American Veterans Center, was able to honor all veterans. So the parade grew. It's now the largest Memorial Day parade in the country. It's now the largest Memorial Day event in the country, with several 100,000 people showing up each year, lining Constitution Avenue to honor our veterans.
I'd like to unpack that a little bit more about how you developed this love and this affinity and this great appreciation for men and women who serve in the United States military.
Well, I'm a veteran myself. I'm a Vietnam War veteran. I was a junior naval officer.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. I was a junior naval officer on a destroyer offshore Vietnam and in the Gulf of Tonkin doing plane guard duty. We did 2 lengthy deployments to the Western Pacific between 1968 and 1971 when I was in. So I have a personal appreciation for the military itself. It was a great experience for me. I learned a lot. I think it helped me a lot in terms of my own character development. In my own family, we have quite a tradition of military service. My father was in the Marine Corps in the 1930s in what's called the Banana Wars in Central America. In fact, he became the light heavyweight boxing champion of the Marine Corps in those days. And he got out and did various things after that. And then he went back into the military service in World War II in the Merchant Marine. Working with naval intelligence based out of New Orleans. My 2 uncles were also involved in World War II. And so there was an immediate example for me to follow in terms of my own family.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And again, the Navy experience was a tremendous one. I've kept in touch with a number of my shipmates 50 years later. We're still in touch. There's nothing like military service to form bonds of friendship. And so I was very grateful to be able to have the opportunity, frankly, to work with veterans. And over these past 20 or more years, I've just had an incredible opportunity to meet some extraordinary heroes.
But World War II was a defining moment. I think it was aptly described as that was the greatest generation. But I want to talk to you about the current generation and what's ahead for the future in your frame of reference for America. I'm talking to Jim Roberts. We'll be back in just a moment with more. And welcome back to America's Hope. I'm talking to my guest, Jim Roberts, who went on to do some great things, creating Radio America, also the American Center for Veterans. And he is also the author of 2 books, The Conservative Decade, One and Hardball on the Hill, baseball stories from the nation's capital. I actually love that. So look, we were just talking about the heroes that you've had the pleasure to meet in your capacity as doing the Memorial Day Parade in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., and the fact that you created Radio America. And you didn't stumble in this opportunity. It seems to me, based on your family's veterans background, the DNA was already poured into you to serve this nation and to serve it proudly and with honor and distinction. Earlier, you recall I said, thank you for your service. But when we say that, are we always aware as the average citizens in this country what that service actually involves? I think you alluded to it with the description of heroes that you've met. Talk to me about the current service that men and women apply when they become active duty military personnel, keeping in mind that less than 1% voluntarily serve this nation.
Right. If I could just back up a minute in terms of my family connections, I forgot to mention that I have a cousin. He's a generation older than me. He died several years ago. His name is Charles Roberts, and he served in the Navy in World War II. And his best friend, Thomas Hagen, who wrote the book that some of your probably your older viewers will recognize. Mr. Roberts was the name, the title of the book. And it was adapted into a Broadway play and then into a movie starring Jack Lemmon and others. And I still see it on television. So,
and I'm not that old, but I do. But I do remember that.
But so Chuck, who lived here in Washington, and I got to be quite close. And I. As a college student, I was aware of his story, of course, and that probably was the thing that more than any other that impelled me to join the Naval ROTC unit at Miami University in Ohio. And so, and it's one of the best things I ever did. The naval experience I had was just tremendous in terms of my formation as a character-wise and otherwise. So I have a great debt to my cousin Chuck. But in terms of today's military, you're right. Unlike the World War II generation, where practically the entire country was involved in the war effort, that's not the case today. As you pointed out, 1% or so of the population is actually involved in military service, and another 1 or 2% have a direct connection with them. It's an all-volunteer force. I think it's probably as good, or maybe even the best force that we've ever fielded. The men and women who serve in today's military are highly motivated. They're highly trained, and they exhibit all the characteristics of bravery and service that the greatest generation did, 60 or 70 years ago. The tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan were very, very difficult for our troops there. I have a lot of problems with the top leadership in terms of strategy and utilization of forces, particularly in Afghanistan. But these young men and women did their duty. I think we have 13 Medal of Honor recipients from Afghanistan. Unfortunately, only 1 from Iraq. That's a major mistake, I think, on the part of the military. I don't know why that's the case. There should be many more. And I say that for one thing because the Medal of Honor recipients are great examples for young people. They go out and speak at schools and civic groups and that sort of thing. And it's just it's a real shame that for political reasons or whatever, we don't have more Medal of Honor recipients from Iraq. But there are 13 from Afghanistan, and we've had many of them at our conferences. And no, so today's military service is the men and women who serve there are, for the most part, extremely motivated. I do have a problem with the policies at the top level. I think wokeness is being injected into the criteria for service. They're spending entirely too much time looking for things like white privilege and guilt and pronoun correction and so forth, rather than training for actual military service. But nonetheless, the force as a whole is a great group of young people. We have many of them at our annual conference and in the Memorial Day parade, and so I have nothing but the highest respect for them.
You know, I appreciate you saying that, and just by way of remembrance, I recall covering the war in Iraq when I was working for Fox, and I was there in 2004. And I was there at a very heightened time. The Battle of Fallujah took place, and it was a very brutal battle. And this handover of sovereignty had taken place, wherein the United States military had been able to enable the Iraqi people to start determining their own form of government. And then, of course, the capture of Saddam Hussein. But what I remember most about that, Jim, was the handover of sovereignty. Watching a nation build and grow to become its own country. And that was an incredible moment. And I remember the American military members rejoicing in the fact that job well done, albeit they still had to do some major work and heavy lifting in order to stop the insurgency that went on. Of course, we know the history of that, not to go back through all of that, but you're right. Why aren't there more Medal of Honor winners from Iraq? Why aren't more men and women recognized for their valor and their commitment to protect America, but also to protect the Iraqi people and then try to help the Middle East?
Right. Yeah, the one recipient that we have from that conflict, David Bellavia, is a good friend of ours. He's on our advisory board. I actually helped him get started in radio after he got out of the service. In fact, he's a radio talk show host in Buffalo, New York. That's his day job. But David said, I could easily reel off to you 15 or 20 veterans of Iraq who should have gotten the Medal of Honor and didn't. I should not be the only one. But looking at Iraq, with all the problems we had there and all the mistakes we made there,
yes,
Iraq is still a democracy, and we forget that. It's a functioning democracy. It's a messy situation with all the factions that exist there, the Shia and the Sunni and the Kurds and so forth. But it is not reverted into a dictatorship. They still have a parliament, they have a president, and they have many of the freedoms that we do. It's a real outlier in terms of Middle Eastern countries, and so we should keep that in mind. That in this particular case, we did not lose. We did something positive for a country, freeing them from a horrible dictatorship, liberating the whole population, women particularly, but it's still an unfinished story, and I'm hoping that I'm hoping for the best there.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's an unfinished process, but America did an incredible work there, along with the Coalition of the Willing, which included the Brits as well as the Australians and other countries that worked with us. Look, what's your hope for America? You've seen the landscape of America over the years. You've served this country in so many ways, not just with the creation of Radio America or the American Veterans Center. But when you see what's going on politically with the divisions and the racial divisions that we have, and even divisions along quote unquote religion, what's your hope for America? What do you think America needs to learned from veterans or even active duty military members who learned to work together through all diverse situations?
Yeah, well, putting self in front, putting a country in front of self is certainly one lesson that stands out. We are a horribly divided country right now. It's not unprecedented. There are examples back in our history where we were as divided or more so. Certainly, the Civil War is one. The 1970s, 60s and 70s with Vietnam was a horrible period of division in this country. And younger people don't recall this, but the streets were just filled day after day with protesters, and we had the civil rights revolution back in the 60s and 70s as well, getting rid of segregation, which brought on a lot of tension, and in the case of the assassination of Martin Luther King, brought on rioting in many of our cities. So we're not in an unprecedented situation, but we're in a very serious situation, I think. Washington is totally polarized now, more so than I can recall it being even back in the 60s and 70s. So we need somehow to recapture that sense of unity, the fact that we're all Americans, whatever our economic, racial distinctions are, we're all Americans. And we made a lot of progress in a lot of areas, and we need to try to come together.
And I like the fact that you're still keeping young Americans involved in this wonderful experiment called America. And every day we strive on this program to show people why there's hope for America, hope for the world, and how we must continue to walk and march towards becoming a more perfect union. You, my friend, you're doing that as well. We'll be back with my final word in just a moment. There is a problem in America, and we don't always see it, and that is the fact that we have so many veterans coming home from war-torn regions who have served in the service of freedom to protect your freedom and theirs, but they suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome. In fact, PTSD can be so bad that we have an average of 17 veterans taking their own life because of post-traumatic stress syndrome. How do we help them? How do we help them break through the mental barrier or the mental hurt that's been inflicted upon them because of seeing war, and then coming home trying to adjust to life in America and making it normal? Well, our next guest is going to introduce you to a program, and in fact, he's doing a remarkable work in this field. His name is Chris Meek. He is co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Soldier Strong. Now, that's a 501c3 charitable organization, and it focuses on helping America's servicemen, women, and veterans take their next steps forward in healing. And Chris has been recognized for his work throughout the United States. Chris, thank you for joining us this hour on America's Hope. And what you do, I'm saying from the beginning, is extremely important. And as a veteran myself, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing for the men and women and even the children who serve in the military. What does Soldier Strong stand for, and how do you help people?
Yeah, Kelly, thanks for having me today. And I want to start by thanking you for your service. So thank you very much. Soldier Strong is a nonprofit, as you mentioned, that started in 2009. What happened was a friend of mine and a mentor who was a retired Marine gave me a copy of a letter from a Marine deployed in Afghanistan saying they weren't living on bases, but they were in Jeeps and foxholes, and it asked for tube socks because they'd hike all day and throw the old ones away, and baby wipes for personal hygiene, and that's how they would take a shower. So we started out with something as simple as care packages, and ended up adding on scholarships to help the post-op GI Bill, and then moved into robotic devices. Our signature device is an exoskeleton, and that enables a paralyzed veteran to stand and walk again. And by chance, that device we donated to a VA hospital in Denver, and they said, Chris, in addition to physical therapy, we're going to use this device for a mental health study. And I said, well, a mental health study on what? And they said, quite simply, for someone to be eye level with the world again. And that really blew my mind. You can't tell from the screen, but I'm 6'3", 215, and so that's something I take for granted. And started researching veteran mental health, which led to PTSD, which, as you mentioned, led to veteran suicide. And we wanted to figure out where our business model of advanced revolutionary technology could fit into that mental health space for veterans. and came across a team at the University of Southern California that's developed virtual reality software to help 9/11 veterans, post 9/11 veterans suffering from PTSD.
And that's a remarkable program. I understand that it's called Brave Mind, and you're doing it in conjunction with the university, but also the Veterans Administration. Is that right?
Yes, correct. So USC has developed and maintains the software, and what we do is we license that software from the university, and then acquire all the equipment needed for the VR treatment, and then we will donate those to individual VA hospitals across the country.
And how does this program work? Because I understand that when the men and women who come for this kind of treatment through the Brave Mind program, they're actually taken back to the field of battle where they saw so much trauma. And how does that help them deal with overcoming the trauma to find clarity and freedom from the PTSD and the other things that plague them mentally?
That's a great question. And the first question I always get is, why would you take somebody back to their trigger point that they're struggling with? And this process is called immersive therapy, or immersion therapy rather. And to your point, it takes you back to that trigger point where you struggle in terms of a specific incident happened to you, whether you're deployed or maybe even back here on the base. And it helps you walk and talk through that specific situation. And you've got the VR headset on, you're with a clinical therapist who will talk you through that situation. And what's been proven to do is reduce the number of treatments by almost 50%. And then also, if you think about a veteran suffering from PTSD, there's a certain stigma associated with that, unfortunately. And a lot of times veterans are afraid to raise their hand and say, hey, look, I'm struggling, I need some help. They're afraid they could lose their gun, their security clearance, promotion, their pension. And what Brave Mind is, it's a video game that heals. There are 14 different scenarios in the software. So it could be a forward operating base in Afghanistan. You could be in a Humvee in Iraq. You could be walking through an Afghani village. Several different things like that, which take you back to that point in time. It allows you to walk through what happened and hopefully get you over that hump.
As a result of doing this, do you know how many veterans you've been able to help?
Because of HIPAA rules, we don't know the exact number, but the VA has shared with us that there have been about 15,000 veterans who have used the technology we've donated. We do have 30 of these devices deployed throughout the United States, anywhere from Boston to Alaska and Hawaii. So it's a wide net we've been casting.
Chris, let me ask you, less than 1% of Americans actually raise their hand to volunteer to serve in the United States military. And once they raise their hands, they forfeit their quote unquote rights as citizens to serve in harm's way for the protection of our freedoms that we value here in America. There's a lot that they put on the line, but it doesn't only affect them, it also affects their families. Talk to me about what veterans, active duty members, what they go through and what their families experience.
Well, to your point, I think the families experience the most difficulty just because, especially if an active duty service member is deployed, the parent, whoever that may be, is home on their own, assuming they've got children raising them, not knowing how their spouse or their partner is deployed, what's going on in harm's way. But also, when that individual comes home and becomes a veteran, or maybe they come back to active duty here at home, there's still going to be some, I'll call collateral damage from being deployed. They see things that we can't think about or think of. And the family struggles with that because it can dramatically change the character of that individual in terms of their behaviors, how they act, how they react to things. I met a veteran recently who talked about a flat tire outside, and he immediately drove under his bed to grab his gun because it sounded like a gunshot. He thought he was back in the fight. And so it's things that we all take for granted. Again, it's the 1% that serve us, and so we've got to be thankful and grateful to them every day. But they're things that we just can't think of that they've gone through and seen. And there's just, again, that collateral damage to the families back here at home.
There's so many reasons why I wanted you on this program to talk about Soldiers Strong. And that's part of it, to explain to Americans what the families go through, because while that man or woman is serving in the military, their families are also exposed to that kind of service and the rigors with the job. It's not always an easy job to serve in the United States military. You're sent to places on a moment's notice sometimes, depending on what your occupational specialty is, and if it's in the hazardous region of going into hotspots around the world, you don't have time to sometimes kiss your family. You just got to go. What debt of gratitude do we owe these men and women who continue to serve and continue to raise their hands to say, I will protect and serve the United States of America against enemies, foreign and domestic?
We owe them everything. Nothing more to say other than that. I mean, we were able to go to bed at night because of them. So whatever we can do, that's why I do this. It's been 14 years.
So what do you say to, I don't want to get political about this, but what do you say to members of Congress who sometimes don't really get why the Veterans Administration and military members need extra help, and they don't always provide the funding in a timely fashion to help them?
That's a great question. That's been the frustrating part from my perspective. I've been trying to put our organization out of business basically since we started, because I feel that the government and or the VA should be sending them the care packages. They should be giving them tube socks. They should be giving them water to shower. They should be funding these $150,000 exoskeleton devices. They should be funding the virtual reality. We pay taxes for a reason, and it should be going first to these men and women who, to your point earlier, put it all on the line, and they took the oath, to sacrifice everything for us.
And Chris, these are young people. These are people and sometimes starting as early as 18. They're in their 20s and 30s, and those who are career, they go on to serve for 20 and sometimes longer, 20 years or longer. The bottom line is that members of Congress and even presidents should learn what it's like to really serve in harm's way. And I don't think they always do that. Sometimes we become so politically minded that we're no earthly good to the men and women who are actually protecting the freedoms and giving us all the right to be free. I just wanted to put that out there.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're absolutely correct. The good news is we are seeing more post-9/11 veterans starting to serve in Congress and in the Senate, so that is helping that conversation. But to your earlier question about the VA and what they should provide, we're seeing a real problem now here in the United States. We just finished the 50th year of the all-volunteer force. And because the military and the VA and the government are not giving them what they deserve and should have, we're seeing a significant drop-off in men and women looking to raise their hand to go and serve as a volunteer. And so that's something that is a real problem here at home, and that's something that Washington has to take a real hard look at.
Indeed, and we want to take a little bit more, a closer look at all the great things that you're doing beyond Soldier Strong. We'll talk about that in just a moment when we return with Chris Meek, co-founder and chairman of Soldier Strong. Back in just a moment. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm Kelly Wright, and I'm talking to Chris Meek. He, of course, is the CEO and chairman and co-founder, I should say, of Soldier Strong, which is helping so many veterans and active and duty military personnel. Chris, again, I've thanked you, and I got to thank you again. You've been cited by various organizations for your philanthropy. And I know you're a humble guy, so I've got to put it out there. You've done a lot of great work to help a lot of people as a philanthropist. You've been a financial services executive for over 25 years, working at SP Global, State Street Global Advisors, and Goldman Sachs. You also hold a BA in economics and political science from Syracuse University, and an MBA in financial management from Pace University in New York City. And you're doing a lot out there. You're also an MPA from the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. In fact, you're even teaching there, and you're a doctoral candidate in organizational change and leadership. Let's talk about change and leadership. As you know, many people want to see America healed. They want to see the soul of America healed. And thereby, we need leadership. From your perspective and your experience, what are you finding in our young people in America and corporate leaders in terms of bringing healing to the soul of America and hope to America through change and leadership?
Well, I think it goes back to your earlier point about people and families needing to be well at home, and that's where it starts. But what I've seen, and certainly in the post-COVID crisis, we've been talking about mental health on veterans, but what we haven't talked about is mental health in general. And I had seen a bit of a crisis or tsunami coming right before COVID and started getting more actively engaged in the mental health space. But what's happened, I think the one positive thing out of COVID, as awful as it was, is it's put a positive spotlight on mental health, and people are talking about it and being much more open about it. And employers are realizing that. They're seeing it. They're seeing the stresses of people looking to go back into the office. The return to work scenario is increasing and wrapping up. And so they've opened up in terms of a mental wellness being programming to entice young people to come work for them. They're giving flexible work hours. They're giving stipends to go to get gym equipment or to go to a personal trainer. And so really they want the whole person, not just the mind at the keyboard, but they're looking to recruit and to hire and retain the whole individual.
And that's so important because if we're helping each other in America, and if we're going to get to that place where we're actually healing the soul of America and being that center of hope, then that means we have to care about our neighbor. We have to care about the people within our own family. As I was discussing before, the greatness of a nation beginning in the homes of its people. So having said that, how do you get to the homes of the people beyond veterans, beyond active duty military members, and as you said, the general public that obviously is grappling with a lot of stress, not only from the COVID pandemic, but just life in general, the anxiety and stress that we all have the tendency to feel because we're bombarded with negative news on a daily basis?
Well, we know from a great communicator that America is that bright, shining light on a hill, and we need to get back to that mindset and to that concept and understand, again, going back to that employee, they're not just an employee. They're a person. They're a father, a mother, a husband, a spouse, a brother, a sister. They're all of that. And we need to have more grace and understanding. And we've got 2 years to listen and one mouth to talk with. So, use those 2 years to listen and keep the mouth at bay.
I like how you say that. And I also like the fact that you brought up the word grace. Grace is such a wonderful word and gift to all of us, even beyond the shores of America. Grace actually is one of those important things that gives us the resiliency, empowerment, and leadership to which you're talking about. Let's drill down on that a little bit more. How did you come to this realization that with grace and resiliency and empowerment, we can create stronger leaders?
I've been blessed. I do have my own podcast, and so it's focused on resiliency, leadership through adversity, and empowerment. And over the last, I'll say, year, as we've gone to the return to work mentality, that's been a word that a lot of my guests have been using, and it's become part of my everyday vernacular because I just kind of threw it out there for you. But it's really just having more and more people think about it, to say it, to use it. And to your point, it just casts such a wide net in terms of what it means, but more importantly, what it can do and how it can help the rest of us heal.
I talked to a good friend of mine, Bob Whitson, who is founder of the Whitson Center, and he once talked to me about America in terms of racial divisions in this country and political divisions in this country. And I remember him saying so eloquently, Kelly, America doesn't have a problem with race, it has a problem with grace. And through your program, Next Steps Forward, which is your podcast, Next Steps Forward with Chris Meek, via the Voice America Network's Empowerment Channel, does race come up and political division come up?
So politics and guns are the two things I don't talk about or try not to talk about.
I wonder why.
I want listeners to come. So that's a great question again. But race has come up, and I've put a big focus again on mental health, but also mental health in minority communities. I had two young gentlemen on a few years ago from Charlottesville, Virginia, and they work for the city of Charlottesville and focus on Black youth and their mental health. And they talk about how the barbershop is the therapist for the Black male community. And my question to them was, well, who's the barber's barber? And I had another guest come on and talk about as a kid, he remembered going to the beauty parlor with his mother on the weekend, and that's where they all talked about and then hung out, and it was sort of a raise a family through a village. And that's where they would go in and talk about their things. And so, minorities and race is a bigger conversation, as it should be. And so I try and put a spotlight on there and have people tell their story. I use my show as a platform for the guest, not for me to ask gotcha questions. And so I think from that, again, using the word grace, is allowing a lot more, much more civil conversations within the communities.
I love the fact that you're doing that. It seems that you and I have similar approaches to how we bring healing to America and hope to America and remind America that it is, as you stated, that beacon of hope and that shining light that's shining on a hill. And we have to remember that. I'm not too many yards away from the Statue of Liberty, and I love that landmark because of what the Lady Liberty represents to America, liberty and life and the pursuit of happiness. So my final question is, what's your hope for America?
It's the $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, this is the greatest nation on the planet, but you're only as strong as your weakest link. and each one of us is a link in that chain. So it's up to us.
That puts it very succinctly, very clearly. Chris Meek, I appreciate you being on the program. Co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Soldier Strong. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate your time.
Yep, we're back with more in just a moment. And welcome back. My final word tonight, it's been a pleasure to talk to Chris Meek and Jim Roberts, two men who really understand what it means to serve in the United States military. And they also understand the dynamics that go on, not only for the service members themselves, but also their families. Their families make a sacrifice as well. And we who are living in mainstream America, we don't often think about the value of the service that these men and women in uniform actually provide for all of us. As I said at the top of the program, freedom is not free. Sometimes it requires a lot of sacrifice of blood, sweat, tears, and treasure. And to those men and women who have served in harm's way and paid the ultimate sacrifice, let us always treat that as something precious, so precious that life itself they gave up in order that we could sing America the Beautiful, my country 'tis of thee. It's your America and my America. Treat them and treat this country with respect and honor, and let hope prevail. Until next time, America, good night.
In my America, my children are black and white, one shade of beautiful, so precious in God's sight. In my America, all lives matter, so let's stop the chatter that tears us apart. We are a family, together you and me, agreeing to disagree, but still live in harmony. The dream that gives hope to us is as strong as it ever was. United we stand, divided we fall. That's my America. In my America, there is no left or right. We're all on common ground. Darkness gives way to light. In my America, you give more than you take. And when someone has lost their way, you lend them a hand and say, we are a family, together you and me, agreeing to disagree, but still live in harmony. The dream that gives hope to us is as strong as it ever was. United we stand, divided we fall. That's my America. We are brothers. I'm not my brother's killer, but I am your keeper. We are sisters. The greatness of our nation starts in the homes of its people. What's in your house? We are family. Together agreeing to disagree, but still live in harmony. The dream that gives hope to us is as strong as it ever was. United we stand, divided we fall. That's my America. United we stand, divided we fall. That's my America. From sea to shining sea, I believe in God, I believe in you, and I believe in we.
And my America.
United we stand, divided